Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by Venngage. Venngage is a design platform that's not just about creating stunning visuals, but also about inclusivity and accessibility. Venngage doesn't just simplify your design process, but takes it up a notch higher with built-in accessibility features. Whether you're looking to run an accessibility check on your designs or export them in the PDF UA format, Venngage has got you covered. So head on over to venngage.com and check them out. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor and one of the accessibility wizards at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am the other accessibility wizard at Chax Training and Consulting. And Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists. If you'd like your certification too, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certifications and download the Body of Knowledge. It is a book, a reference material that is your start to making sure you have all the right topics and context for taking the test. But just realize you've got to have some experience to take that test. It is not those of you who are just test takers and feel like you can do it. You've got to show that you've been doing it for 1 or 2 years as a part of your job. So it's not an easy test, but I wouldn't say it would be hard if you were doing this for a couple of years. I think you could definitely pass it. So awesome. Well, Chad, today's podcast is special considerations for accessible multi-language documents, right? So I wanted to take a moment today to really kind of just touch on some things to think about when you're dealing with multi-language documents, because often people the very first question they have is, do I do it in one document and have both languages, or do I do it in 2 different documents? What's the best way forward? And the first thing I ask people is, do you have any graphic content or forms? Because those are some of the 2 things that you have to consider. Currently, there is no way to set alt text in multiple languages in a PDF. So how do you, if your document is Spanish and English, and you're like, okay, Spanish paragraph, English paragraph, Spanish paragraph, English paragraph, and then you got a picture, what do you do for the alt text? Do you then put both inside the picture, inside the alt text? That can be really cumbersome if you've got 2 or 3 sentences of English along with 2 or 3 sentences of Spanish, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I could think of like trying to incorporate some trickery, right? Where you actually have 2 of each figure, right?
Sure.
And so that you could do like one in one language, one in another, but that would also be very cumbersome to navigate. Like why? Okay. So now not only do I have to read a figure, but I have to read a figure in 2 separate languages, right? So
right.
I think you have to ask yourself like what the value is, right? What is the value of doing something like that, and how useful would it be? Yeah.
Well, I think that, thinking about it, we obviously, my brain, it just goes a mile a minute. I would probably start the document with some hidden alt text that says, this document contains multiple languages and images are presented in both languages, English first and XYZ language second. I guess this would really only work well if you only had 2 languages, right? Maybe English and Russian or English and Spanish, right, or something like that. And then that gives the user the ability to skip. So you could tell them something like this, this document presents images in 2 different languages, press G to skip one language or the other, so that you could either listen to the first one. And I guess if it was, if your home language was English and you skipped the first graphic to hear the second one, there's no way to skip the second one. So I'm just trying to think out loud here. So if I've got 2 images and the first one is Spanish and then the second one is English, because my document is primarily in Spanish.
Okay.
Right. If I'm listening and I hear the graphic going off in Spanish and I want Spanish, I've listened to it and now I have this other graphic. How do I skip that graphic to get to the next paragraph of text. Because if it's a heading, sure, but you have no idea what's coming after the graphic. It would only work if the perceived extra language is English and I want to hear Spanish. So if I make an English document that also has Spanish and I'm a Spanish speaker, that works well for me. I can just pass over the English and listen to the Spanish. But if I'm an English speaker, it becomes a problem, right?
I mean, wouldn't tapping the down arrow key go to the next object?
Yeah, I guess I guess you're right. But you would just have to, this is where that user experience really is important, because not everybody's an expert at screen readers and navigation. But the nice thing is that the down arrow is a pretty common tool. So I guess if I'm listening to the English one, I guess I would probably say in the instructions in the beginning, I would say, this document presents all graphics in 2 languages. Press G to skip the first, the English language, or the down arrow to skip the Russian or the second language. And then that gives the user the ability to use one key or the other, depending upon what they're doing. So I guess, I mean, go ahead.
Well, the challenge is, I mean, you would not be able to accomplish this in every program, right? So it'd be something that would be fairly easy to do in Adobe InDesign. But in Word, they're gonna get pretty tricky,
You could do it in Word because you use the word wrap, and you place one figure and then float it and place the other figure and float it, and then you just move them behind each other. But man, if you're having to deal with the editing of that document, boy, that sure makes it really tricky to know you've got these extra things hidden in plain sight. I mean, it would be really, really bad. Go ahead.
While we're talking about that, Dax, while we're on the subject of graphics in foreign languages, one of the areas that I often see this being a problem is like when somebody is doing a document that's in, say, Spanish or French or whatever.
Yep.
One of the areas that's often overlooked is the alt text for those graphics.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times I'm in like a Spanish document and I look at the alt text for the image and it's in English.
Right.
Because nobody went the full distance and translated that content for the language in which it's being read. So I feel like that's a kind of a huge area where people overlook and they forget, they forget to take the extra step and make sure that they translate that content for the appropriate language.
I agree 100%. I figured out a solution, Chad. Here's a solution. If I'm in Word or I'm in InDesign, I'm going to give all of my images a border. So now I've got my image, and then I've got a drawn border. I've got a frame with a border in it, right? Now I can't assign the alt text to the border and the image in the same shot in the source file, but I can assign the alt text in the Acrobat document to one or the other. So when I go into the Acrobat document and I look in the content panel, I'm going to have the X object for the image, and then I'm going to have a path for the border. And so what I would do is separate the two, put the path in a figure tag, put the image in a figure tag, and then I could assign Spanish to the path and English to the image. And now I've got both of them. The problem is that it's, again, editing the final, the PDF, and not editing the source, which is what we always try to really focus on, which is how can I bake accessibility into my document rather than bolting it on to the end. And so definitely not a perfect workflow, but from an editing standpoint, I couldn't imagine having those two images ghosted behind each other.
Well, I mean, if you're going to take that approach, I guess what I would think would be to kind of in InDesign, instead of applying a border to the image, create a separate frame on top and apply the border to that.
Yeah, again,
way,
it goes back to having two things directly on top of each other, and then knowing as an editor, hey, I've got two things here. If you have more than one person in your workflow editing a document, boy, that can get messy. And
well, it's funny you say that, because I'm currently working I'm working on a client project right now, and they have to have the navigation in the PDF. And I explained the problems to them. I explained it's not a great experience. So I used our technique where I inserted an extra line of copy in the navigation that says press H to skip the navigation. Right. And so what I did is I put a big magenta box out on the pasteboard that said, these elements have a hidden line of text in them for skipping the navigation, to try to, like exactly what you're saying, to try to convey to anybody else who goes to pick up this document, this is why this is like this, and kind of explain the situation. So
and we do that all the time, where we use the pasteboard to add notes for other designers so that they understand we've done something interesting or different to that text. So if you're interested in kind of our solution on navigation bars, that we did several podcasts on navigation bars inside PDFs. It requires one specific thing. It means you have to have a heading after every navigation bar. So if you've got a navigation bar at the top of your paragraph, at the top of your page, every page, your next element after that navigation bar must be a shortcuttable item, like
is that a word?
Yeah,
shortcuttable.
Well, I mean, you need to be able to press H or T or whatever, and have it be a consistent user experience, so that on every page, the user can somehow bypass that navigation and move to the next piece of content. It makes it hard when you just have paragraph text after the navigation menu, because there's no way for the user to then skip to just that next paragraph, because there's no shortcut key for that. So designing with accessibility in mind, Chad, it comes up almost every podcast. It really is a fundamental of what we do. So
it really does. I mean, a lot of what we do comes down to that, right? It's just, there's often more than one answer to the problem, but as we often point out, you ask yourself what you want the user experience to be, and let that drive your decision. Yeah. And based on the answer, that's your answer. That's how you approach the problem.
All right, so we've talked about alt text for multi-language documents, right? What about forms? Because form fields are the same kind of way. Now, we worked with an organization where they had page 1 was all English, and they had one set of form fields on page 1. In fact, it was the opposite. Page 1 was whatever the base language was, Russian or Korean or Tagalog or whatever that language was. And page 2 was the English version. And what they did is they made sure that the form field for name was exactly the same name on page 1 as on page 2. So if I'm Russian and I fill out form field 1, it automatically populates page 2. So when the school gets the form back, they don't have to be Russian speakers. They can just move to page 2, and all that form field data is right there in the form field. The problem is that, well, it's not really a problem. The unwritten thing here is that the tooltips for both form fields, whether it's on the English page or on the Russian page, are going to be in Russian, because they have to be exact same. So that hidden metadata is going to be heard by the person using assistive technology in the non-English language. But I guess if you are, the only way it would be a problem is if I, as an intake specialist for this school, in this case, happen to be blind, and I'm trying to do this work, and I'm not a Russian native speaker, I'm going to hear all these different foreign languages in my information. So, but that's a pretty low use case. Their goal was, how do I make the form fillable for someone who doesn't speak English, but is, and then for us to be able to get it.
And I mean, it really was an accessibility problem, right? I mean, it just in a slightly different way. I mean, instead of instead of meeting the needs of somebody with a disability, we're meeting the needs of somebody who does not speak the English language.
Right.
So it gives them the ability to fill out the form, but then if the intake person is an English speaker, they can just go to that page and they'll be able to know what their name is, what their address is, what all that information. It was really a pretty creative solution, I thought.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like a great way to solve for the problem. Yeah.
Well, and I'll bring it up because we don't often talk about deafness as a disability in document accessibility, because most people who are deaf are not deaf blind. But I would tell you that most people who are deaf, probably the lion's share of people who are deaf, would never consider their deafness a disability. They consider their deafness just as if one person speaks Russian and another person signs. So if you're going to provide this information, the nice thing is that if I can read, then I don't have an extra accommodation. But remember, many people who are deaf are not great readers. And that's not to say all or anything. It's just to say, look, sometimes sign language is their native language. And so a printed form, just because they can see, doesn't mean they're going to be able to fill it out and understand it. And so that might mean extra consideration. So.
Yeah, I discovered that. I think I've brought this up on our podcast previously, but I was helping somebody online who signed up for an accessibility conference. And after they signed up, the conference made them aware that they did not budget for ASL interpreters.
Right.
And the gentleman was pretty upset about this. And I asked a very naive question. In hindsight, it was a naive question. I said, well, wouldn't captions be a sufficient alternative to that?
Yeah.
And the guy was super, super nice and kind to me. And he said, you need to understand that most people who are deaf read at like a 4th grade level.
Right.
And so not having ASL interpreters, they're not able to follow the captions fast enough to follow along. And that was really eye-opening to me, Dax, because it's something that I was not aware of, but now I am, you know, and so that's a really good piece of information to have, you know, as we're doing this kind of work.
Yeah, no, I just looked up some statistics here, and it says only 5% of deaf Americans achieve a reading proficiency at a 12th grade level or higher. And that fluency in English language, an estimated 20% of deaf individuals are fluent written English speakers, or, you know, fluent in written English. So definitely, it is not
that's only a
foregone conclusion.
Yeah, it's only a 5th of the people, right? So that's a
right.
relatively low percentage, right? Yeah.
So special consideration for multi-language documents, deafness, people who speak ASL as their native language fall right into this category, right?
Mm-hmm.
The next thing I want to talk about is font encoding. We get this all the time where people just pick a font and they're like, oh, that's, you know, Hindi. So they, you know, put that font in there, and then we go to try to tag it, and it becomes word spaghetti in the tags tree because the underlying code of that language is incorrect. So we always tell people, go use a Google font, because all the Google fonts have been tested and vetted to be Unicode compliant and are encoded correctly. So starting there with something non-stylistic and more standard is a great place to start when you're dealing with multi-language documents.
For sure, because there's nothing more frustrating. And the thing is, you typically don't encounter the character encoding error until the very end, right? Yeah. Like it's usually after you've already gone through and done the tagging and updating the tag structure and remodifying everything and getting everything where it needs to be. And you run it through the checker and it's like character encoding.
Yeah, I went through that just yesterday with one of my handouts for something I was putting together. And my character encoding issue had to do with ligatures. And because I built the document in Illustrator, it did not like the FI. I used Access PDF. I'm like, great, I got you covered. No worries. Yeah. I'm just going to open up Access PDF, fix the encoding. It was encoded correctly. The F and the I were, in fact, encoded right. But the base underlying font was a variable font. And so just so for everybody here listening, if you use any of the Adobe products, do not use variable fonts if you're trying to make something accessible, because they will not encode correctly at all. It is unfortunate. And yeah,
it's a bizarre problem. I don't really understand it. I mean, I would need some font wizard to explain this to me, like why this is happening, because it's just bizarre. I mean, like a variable font, for those of you who don't know, what a variable font does is it allows you to adjust the weight, the italicization,
it's like they say, if you've ever looked at a font and go, oh, normal is too light, but bold is too bold, and I want something in between. You're like, can't I just have a slider that allows me to like fine tune it? That's variable font.
That's a variable font. Yeah. And I mean, the technology's cool. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I think it's really a neat thing, but for what we do, Dax, it's a game changer because we can't make it accessible. You
have to flatten it, convert it to curves, then do OCR. And OCR is actually another thing to be thinking about. If you've got foreign language documents and there are images of text, we see this all the time, big blocks of Cyrillic languages, right to left languages, simplified Chinese, and it's just a big image. Those have to be OCR'd, optical character recognition, and that can pose additional problems if the image is low res, if the font is highly stylized, all of those things. So really try to avoid images of text whenever you can. So, and the last two things I want to talk about here, Chad, are less about the technical. And well, actually, one more thing I want to talk about before we get into the last topic here is form field order, right? If you're dealing with a document that has forms in it and the language is right to left and you do auto detect form field, it is not going to put them in the order that you would expect to go in, right?
No, not at all. And I mean, that's kind of like, well, that kind of makes my brain hurt as we think about it, because you need to make sure that if it is you're talking about a right to language font, right?
Right to left language. Yeah.
So if it is a right to left language, the text needs to be RTL. The text needs to be right to left. But also then your form fields need to be positioned appropriately to that right to left language, right?
Yes.
You need to position the form field to the left of the text so that it's read in the correct order, right? So,
but it's not even just that. It is literally putting them in the order. Visually, yes, they're going to be wherever somebody's going to have left the space where it's supposed to go, right? The form field is going to be to the left of the text, exactly like you said. But when you use auto detect form field, it's going to order them in the form order, like the numbered order in the forms panel. It's going to order them left to right. Number 1 is going to be the leftmost form field. Number 2 is going to be the one in the middle, and number 3 is going to be the one on the right. So you have to sit and start moving all those around so that it actually does match the order of right to left instead of left to right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Correct.
A lot to
right,
think about.
Left, right. Yes,
yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I know what messes with me, like, I've had a couple of InDesign documents that are right to left language. And when you highlight the text, you have to highlight right
backwards.
To left.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. Like you try to highlight left to right and it doesn't work. It won't highlight it. And you're like, what's going on? And you realize, you have to go right to left. It's weird.
Well, speaking of right to left, in Japan, they drive on what I consider the wrong side of the street. And every time the guy would go to make a turn, I'm like, no. Because I'm thinking he's turning in the wrong way down the wrong street. And of course, my brain just did not make that adjustment very well. I'm sure if I lived there for quite a while, it would be different.
That happened to me when I was in the UK too. My buddy was driving and I was like, and I'm like, it's okay. Right. You know what I mean?
And then you feel really stupid. Yeah.
When you go into a traffic circle the wrong way, that your brain just can't process that.
Yeah. So the last two things I want to talk about are image inclusion and localization and cultural sensitivity. So often we think about the text when we're dealing with multi-language documents, but we don't really think about the context or the imagery that's in it. And in certain cultures, imagery means something different. Piggy bank, to anybody from the US, we think of a piggy bank and it's say, put your money in the piggy bank. We all get piggy banks as a kid. But in other cultures, a pig is considered dirty and not an animal that I would want on my document. So maybe in addition to changing language, sometimes you have to change some of that imagery around to make sure that maybe people, females' heads are covered, or that you're not using thumbs up in certain cultures means a whole different thing than thumbs up in the US culture. So just being aware of some of that, I think, is really important as a secondary layer to what we call localization of our files. So, and then the last one here is image inclusion, and just making sure that if you're going to have a document that has imagery as part of its core content, that if you're using images that are just all white people or all black people or all anybody, you should be thinking about how can I culturally diversify these imageries to match, my last name's Castro. My heritage is Spanish. My family founded the Castro Valley. My great relative was governor of California 2 times. But you look at me, you might see a white guy. And that's really not culturally who I am, but it's kind of what you see. But I never really thought about, up until probably the last 10 years, people who are darker skinned, not seeing superheroes that are representative of them, or not seeing people in astronauts or technical or CEOs that identify with you, right? And I was watching a YouTube video on a woodworker, and the woodworker was like, I wanted to grow up and be a woodworker because when I watched these other videos, I never saw anybody that matched my visual representation. I couldn't envision myself. And I thought, what? That's a gap. And I want to fill be that gap, fill that gap for other people. So all that to say, long way around, just be sensitive that if you're going to translate these documents into multiple languages, and there's an opportunity to be more culturally diverse in your imagery, that's a good thing to do. Definitely a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Well, I hope that you guys found some good nuggets of information in this podcast. I know Dax and I sat down and we were talking about like what we wanted to cover today, and we both had encountered some foreign language documents that we were working on this past week, and it just seemed like a good topic to cover. So we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you gleaned some useful information from it. Once again, we just want to thank Venngage for being our sponsor. Remember that Venngage is a design platform that's not just about creating stunning visuals, but also about inclusivity and accessibility. So head on over to venngage.com and check them out. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where every other week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.